So hi everyone. I think we're going to kind of get started. I realize that people will be sort of dribbling in for the first couple minutes, but I think that's okay. We want to make the most of the time that we have together. So hello and welcome. My name is Tracy Rosenberg. I'm the Executive Director of Media Alliance, which is a democratic communications advocacy nonprofit based in Oakland, California, and also an ACM West board member. The title of this panel is Whose Net, Our Net? And what we were trying to sort of bring to you guys today is a look at sort of the communications platform that has changed everything in the past 15 to 20 years, and talk about the ways as access providers, as really frontline people providing freedom of expression opportunities that are growing increasingly limited in this society. What you sort of need to know about where the internet is at, and maybe more importantly, where it's going to be in the next couple of years. Our hope is that in the process of training people how to express themselves, how to get their messages out, how to use equipment and technology to put their perspectives forward via your access centers, that you'll also be creating the next generation's commitment to an open and a free communications system. Because when we don't have that, the impact of it hits us all, and it hits the segments in our society with the least power, with the shortest side of the stick. So what kind of communication system we're looking at going forward is a really central justice issue, and you guys are very much the frontliners in terms of talking about that system, how it is, how it works, and how it has to need to work in the public interest. So, I'm very pleased to have the guests here for this panel that we do. You're very lucky. These are two of the most accomplished and experienced communication scholars and attorneys that you could possibly hope for. We have a third panelist presumably stuck in traffic on the way. And I think I'm going to start by handing it over to our first speaker, who's not going to be able to stay with us for the duration of the panel, so I want to get right to it. And that is Professor Alan Hammond of the University of Santa Clara. Who, if I have the biography correct, is currently the director of the Law and Public Policy Program at Santa Clara University, the Center for Science, Technology, and Society, and is also serving as the director of the Broadband Institute of California. So Alan is going to talk to us a little bit, I think, about the ongoing net neutrality struggles, and also sort of what kind of internet we may or may not have a couple of years down the line. So Alan?
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. So I'm going to take a run at the Verizon suit against the FCC and talk generally about the suit in the context of the 60s, which may be a little odd for folks. Do you guys remember the 60s? Were you born in the 60s? Of course. So it's basically something that you sort of know about from programs that you see on TV and whatnot. Well, so the implications of this suit are, I think, very significant. We know that public free speech is increasingly migrating to the internet. Whether you're talking about YouTube or Facebook or texting, and you could name, I'm sure, 100 other examples. We've also got increased access to entertainment programming. But what happens to public speech in terms of constitutional protection if you're talking about communicating on a private network? I'll give you a couple of examples very quickly. During the civil unrest of the 50s and 60s, local governments used something called ex parte TROs, temporary restraining orders, to block public speech. That's a hearing before a magistrate or a local judge alleging irreparable harm if speakers are allowed to be accessed to speak in a public place. And because the speakers themselves were excluded from these hearings, they had no opportunity to be heard before a decision denying their speech rights was made. That practice was basically overturned because it violated the Constitution of the United States. It denied due process to the speakers and, of course, undermined their First Amendment speaking rights. But when Verizon refused mobile phone text messaging access to NARAL, there was no due process and no speech access protection. Verizon stated that its messaging system was closed to groups with content or an agenda that may have been seen as controversial or unsavory to any of our users. The messaging system wasn't deemed a common carrier service by the FCC, so technically, Verizon didn't have a common carrier obligation to provide access. So although Verizon reversed this decision after substantial public protest, it maintained its right to block access, and it argues that internet access is not deemed to be common carrier service. So the question is, does speech migrate to the net protected speech? One more example. So when broadcast station WLBT, this is going way back, was cited for refusing to carry or degrading the transmission of network programming featuring an African American or addressing civil rights concerns, the courts had to force the FCC to address the lack of public service, thereby upholding the public's right to access to diverse information. They ultimately forced the broadcaster to confront its responsibilities by challenging it in a license renewal proceeding. In broadcasting, you get your license to operate on a particular piece of spectrum for a limited number of years, and then you have to come back for renewal. That's become very easy to do now, but at that time there was at least the possibility that citizens could challenge the renewal of the broadcast license. But when Comcast blocked or degraded user access to BitTorrent, the FCC's efforts to rein in the behavior, because after all it violated the net neutrality principles, was overturned by the DC Circuit when Comcast challenged the FCC's authority to protect consumers and act under Title I of the Communications Act of 34. The FCC sought to rework the rules. Verizon then sued the FCC, asserting that the FCC's open internet rules violated Verizon's First Amendment rights to edit and therefore control transmission of speech over its network. Now, I'd stop here and ask whether it's solely its network, since it relies on public rights of way and spectrum that is owned by the government in trust with people in the United States. But we'll come back to that issue in the conversation. If Verizon wins, obviously the rules are repealed. Companies that provide pipeline access to the internet like Comcast and AT&T and of course Verizon would be free to block other websites in favor of their own website content. Now that result could be contrary to the non-discrimination prohibitions of traditional common carriage, and which require you to charge the same prices for the same services to like customers. And that's basically what I grew up in policy understanding. And when I worked for MCI and when I worked for Satellite Business Systems, that was something we lived by in terms of providing service. Moreover, unlike the protection the public enjoys from a government oversight of the tariffing process and common carriage services, services provided under a private contract with the public at a decided bargaining disadvantage is what we're doomed to have, or at least looks as if we're going to have. Consider these terms of service provisions for high-speed service. First, quote, the phone company may immediately terminate or suspend all or a portion of your service without notice for conduct that AT&T believes tends to damage the name or the reputation of AT&T or its parents, affiliates, and subsidiaries. Or check this one. The company, in this case Verizon, reserves the right and sole discretion to change, limit, terminate, modify at any time, temporarily or permanently cease to provide the service or any part thereof to any user or group of users without prior notice and for any reason or no reason. These terms of service are part of a take it or leave it adhesion contract under which consumers are presented with no ability to negotiate different terms. When you bought your cell phone and you took service, did you get to sign a contract? Did you have any right to negotiate that? No. So it's part of a take it or leave it adhesion contract. If you want the service, you take it under the terms provided. And under such provisions, public access and speech rights may be severely hampered because they are bargained away in order to receive the service. So I leave you with this question. Is speech migrating to the net protected speech? I would suggest that we have some serious work to do to make sure that it is. Thank you.
Okay. So we will definitely go to some discussion back and forth. I'm not speaking into a mic, but oh well. So just a couple of comments, and then we'll turn to our second speaker. I attended the hearing that was held about net neutrality after the, basically after the BitTorrent download issue came to the FCC, and as some of you will remember, it was some guy in Silicon Valley who was downloading medieval barbershop quartets of all silly things. And because he was an engineer, discovered that he was basically being squashed by Comcast, although he was committing no crime. These were not copyrighted materials. Obviously, they were from the 12th century. And yet he was having his upload and download services that he had paid for being throttled. And the FCC did take an action, and as a result of taking an action, ended up in court, because they were, again, violating Verizon's First Amendment rights. And the question becomes, what First Amendment rights for Verizon? And how can all of the rest of our First Amendment rights be sort of in a subsidiary position to those of Verizon, which obviously has a little bit more money than we do to go to court to enforce their hypothetical rights. But when we talk about corporations having the rights of individuals and citizen versus United, here's a big example. This is exactly what's happening. Verizon has First Amendment rights, we maybe not so much.
We're losing them.
Yeah. So another way that the internet has been in the news as of late is, of course, what we started hearing about in June of 2013 out of a hotel in Hong Kong. Which looks not only at our ability to communicate information, but how much of an audience that we have while we're communicating it. So I'm very glad to have with us David Greene from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, who have been doing a heroic job of talking about internet surveillance, actually for quite a long time, not just for the past 4 months, but certainly in the past 4 months, it has become a subject of mass conversation instead of just a subject for geeky speculation in some corners. So David Greene served for more than a decade as the executive director and lead staff counsel for the First Amendment Project. Served as a counsel at Bryan Cave LLP, working in media and on First Amendment issues, and has now been at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So I believe he's going to talk a little bit about internet surveillance, some of what we're finding out, some of what we don't know yet, but might find out, and what we can do about it.
Thank you, Tracy. So, thank you for having me back. I think I told Tracy before, the last time I spoke at an ACM conference, I think was in 1998. I think it was the Eastern Regional Conference, and I was on a panel about broadcast indecency. So this is much different, but I'm happy to be back. So let me first start by saying that I'm going to give you sort of a very basic overview of what we think we know about the U.S. government's surveillance of internet communications. And with the caveat that I don't think there's any human being, single human being, that actually knows everything. I think even the people, the way our intelligence community tends to work is that you don't have one person know everything, because that creates a vulnerability. So I don't even think within the intelligence community there's one person who knows, or maybe there's one, but but there may not even be one person who knows the full extent. And that's very intentional in the intelligence community. And certainly, as we're learning this information, as it leaks out and trying to put all these pieces together as best as we can. So let me just, as a little bit of background, it's important to understand that after the church committee hearings, so I'm going back to the 1970s, after the church committee hearings, which was the congressional investigative body that was formed in response to the revelations of the FBI's, primarily the COINTELPRO program, which was the FBI's surveillance of, well, the free speech movement and lots of other stuff related to that. So the church committee was a large-scale investigation. One of the recommendations that came out of the church committee was that a recognition that there was a need for the U.S. government to be able to conduct surveillance of non-U.S. persons, which means a non-U.S. person is someone who is neither a citizen nor physically located in the United States. So a need to conduct surveillance of non-U.S. persons, and there need to be a way. And the difference is that because when you're a non-U.S. person, the argument goes that the Fourth Amendment protections don't apply. And so we need to have a way of doing this in a way that's going to be very fast, efficient, and secret, because a lot of intelligence work needs to happen in secret. And so one of the recommendations for the church committee have is that we're going to create this new court. And this court's going to be called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. And it's going to serve this purpose of providing judicial oversight for the government when it wants to conduct targeted surveillance of non-U.S. persons. And so in 1974, I want to say, no, it was later than that, 77, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court was created. So it was during the Carter administration. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court was created, and that served this function of issuing, of approving these sort of secret requests for surveillance of non-U.S. persons. Okay, fast forward to the immediate aftermath of September 11th, 2001, and the executive branch, presumably the president, although there's some speculation, there might have been others within the executive branch who were more motivating factor than this, particularly the vice president perhaps, were asked the president's counsel for an opinion as to whether it was possible to actually conduct surveillance of non-U.S. persons without even having to go through the secret court. And there was, and the president's counsel issued an opinion that said, yes, we believe that you can do that, that in your inherited role as the chief executive and as the commander-in-chief of the military and whatever else, we think you have the ability, as long as it's with the goal of fighting international terrorism, to actually do things that don't even require the approval of the Foreign Intelligence Service Court. And this collection of investigative and surveillance techniques became known as the President's Surveillance Program. Well, that's, I guess, what they called it in-house. We didn't know this thing existed for another 5 years after that. Anyway, and there within that program was surveillance that was subject to no court approval at all. So the existence of, one of the things that happened, a lot of things happened, but one of the components of this foreign intelligence surveillance, of this presidential surveillance program was an information gathering technique that has been labeled and that we at EFF have labeled upstream, but we're now learning that perhaps that's not the actual technical name. But the idea of upstream is that the government, either by agreement or by fiat and coercion, essentially installed splitters in the fiber optic networks of all the major telecommunications pipelines. And so actually there'd be a, come on in. There'd be a physical, so basically that, as the in the headquarters, and this was discovered, that we discovered this when a whistleblower actually revealed that in the AT&T San Francisco office on Folsom Street, there actually was a secret room, and in that room, fiber optic cable split, and half the, one cable went to do what it was supposed to, and the other group just collected all the fiber optic traffic, and then that went to the NSA. And the NSA, by the way, is the intelligence agency of the military. So it's separate from the CIA, separate from the FBI. Sometimes I think they like each other, sometimes they hate each other, but the NSA is military intelligence. So so this upstream program, where this idea that you have all fiber optic communications, that's going to include and it's going to include internet communication and email, was at least being collected by the NSA. Unless, I guess, perhaps you weren't using fiber optic communications, or perhaps a very, very small provider. I don't even know if such things existed. Anyway, we at EFF learned about this when a whistleblower named Mark Klein, who worked at AT&T, told us about it, and ultimately we, at EFF, and this was well before I got there, filed a lawsuit suing AT&T, saying, well, AT&T, you can't do this. Congress responded to that lawsuit by granting all the telecom companies immunity, saying, don't sue them, sue us. So then we filed a new lawsuit and sued them, and sued the government. And that lawsuit, which is called Jewel versus the United States, is still pending, slowly, very slowly moving forward. What happened after and so there was that disclosure, and then there was a further disclosure by several newspapers that there were, that in addition to that, there was also other large-scale collection of all types of communications data. Congress responded to this in 2008, so I'm getting up to the future, up to the present. Congress responded to 2008 by passing another law called the FISA Amendments Act. So FISA is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that was the original one. And so in 2008 there were amendments. And one of the things these amendments do, and again what Congress was trying to do, instead of just saying, no, stop doing this, what it tried to do was, well, which was, harkens back to the original FISA, was, well, let's create a legal way for you to do it. And hopefully this legal way will have some oversight built into it, and we'll feel better about it. And so they have this Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act, which was passed became effective in 2008, allows them to collect data directly from telecommunications providers, and through an application to this Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. And what 702 did that was a great efficiency, and why the NSA, other members of the intelligence community said they needed it, was that previously the other legal way to do it was that you had to, each time you had an individual, a non-US person who you were targeting, you would actually have to go and get an order that was specific to that person. And what Section 702 allowed you to do did not require individual orders. It actually allowed you just to collect the data, as long as you reasonably believe that you would be capturing primarily foreign communications regarding non-US persons. So that was Section 702. And so most of what has been happening, at least what we know about that's been happening over the past 5 years, has been under this Section 702. And you might even hear the words Section 702 bandied about when people talk about it. And again, this does, the letter of the law is supposed to be limited to collecting information regarding non-US persons, and then even within that small category, who are reasonably suspected of having ties to terrorism. But it obviously is going to collect a lot of incidental information, incidentally collect information about US persons, because non-US persons communicate with US persons, and so what the administration, what the NSA decided, well, as long as it's 51% foreign, then that's okay. And that's all these things are remaining to be litigated. But what we know is that they are collecting, and they've admitted they're collecting a ton of stuff about U.S. persons as well. And they say, well, don't worry about it because we only collect it, we don't actually look at it unless we have identified what we believe to be a reasonable suspicion of a link to foreign terrorism. So, and again, a lot of the debate that's going on now is between, are you okay with the government collecting all of your communications data as long as they don't look at it? Is that the tree falling in the woods and nobody's hearing it, and so it's okay? Or do you find just the idea of collection to be bad? And that's some of the debate going on. So there's this so anyway, going back, I sort of skipped over this. There was this upstream program with the splitters that even was recurring before Section 702. Now they're trying to justify it using Section 702, even though it was happening before that law was passed. The other part of this that was just disclosed in June by both the Washington Post and the Guardian, I think this was the second of the Snowden disclosures. This even came out before we knew he was Snowden. I think this disclosure before we knew his name. And this was what was called the Prism, but appeared to be called the Prism program. And Prism was legal requests, NSA requests that were directed to specific companies, not to the pipeline providers, but to more of your conventional internet service providers, such as Google and Yahoo and Facebook, and I think there's a list of Skype, Pal Talk, which I think is mostly European, used in Europe. I had the list in front of me earlier and don't have it in front of me now. There's a list of, I think, 8 of these major companies that had, what the government had said they were cooperating in this program. What we've since learned is many of them were only cooperating under the compulsion of a court order to cooperate. and what we found is that many companies, particularly Yahoo, have been actually spent a lot of time actually challenging the validity of these orders. But anyway, but this Prism program actually compelled them to sort of disclose sort of massive amounts of communications data. And this could include email communications, including email content, as well as internet traffic data and stuff like that. And again, it did require that there be some at least intention to target foreign, a non-US person who was reasonably suspected of being in terrorism, and again the acknowledgement that we were going to collect a lot of other stuff also. So when this law was disclosed, what the response we got from the government was from James Clapper, who's the head of who's the national, the NDI, the National Director of Intelligence. I think I forget what the acronym is. And the important thing to understand with Clapper is that he's not in the NSA. He's not part of the NSA. That's a separate agency. He's sort of be ahead. He's supposed to sort of oversee the various intelligence communities, but he's actually a member of the NSA, and this is an NSA program. And I think what we're learning is he actually doesn't know the full. Again, because this is all on a need-to-know basis. And he might not even know. But anyway, he was the person the administration trotted out to try and to explain this. And he explained, well, first of all, because the original disclosure made it seem that what the NSA had done was to build in sort of backdoor access into Google and Yahoo and Facebook, the same way it sort of had done the splitter with Upstream, where they were just getting everything. And Google quickly came out and said that we have not done that. We can't tell you a lot, but we can tell you that there's no backdoor access. And then Clapper came out and explained, he said that this is all done by way of individual order to the companies. so that we've not built in something technological, and as far as we've been able to tell, that seems to be the case, that there does not at this time appear to be some type of backdoor access. So anyway, that's, again, we're still trying to put all these pieces together, but it seems right, I think a good assumption right now is that everything you do over the internet is at least being collected by the NSA, and I think you need to really operate on that assumption. And again, the advice at EMF that we've always given is, well, you should encrypt as much of your internet communication as possible. You should encrypt your email, which is a fairly easy thing to do. You try to encrypt your internet communications. Although just a few weeks ago, there were other disclosures that were, it seemed that the NSA basically can break most encryption. But anyway, we try the best we can. So, but I do think we at least need to operate on the assumption that the government, again, has collected everything, whether or not it's, and that's just internet. We can talk about sort of the telephone records separately.
Okay.
I'll stop there because before I really scare
Yeah,
everybody.
well, we've gone from the 70s to 2013. It's a long journey. Okay, so there's a whole lot to say about surveillance, and David said quite a bit of it. What I'm going to add, what I'm going to add, because you all are running television stations, is tomorrow there is the first large national rally against mass surveillance happening in Washington, D.C. It will be live streaming. The rally is scheduled for noon to 3 p.m. You're going to correct me if I'm wrong.
Eastern time, right?
Noon to 3 p.m. Eastern time, which is our 9 a.m. to noon for most of us in the Western states. It's going to be live streamed, the entire thing, and I would assume that there'll also be an archive of that 3-hour program. So for any of you that want to talk about this issue, that could be a place to get some wonderful material. There will be a terrific assortment of speakers, a couple celebrities here and there, and some music, and some terrific information. So I'm putting that out. And why don't we see what you guys want to hear more about?
And then you can catch that streaming at the website is stopwatching.us.
The irony. Stopwatching.us/rally. Okay, so why don't we see what you guys want to hear more about? I could go from there.
I have a question. Well,
Yeah.
Stopwatching.us. I know it's live stream. Will any of you be collecting it? And maybe you can pass it out, be able to. Who's actually, I guess, broadcasting it so we can get it.
Okay.
So we can put it
Stop
on.
Watching Us is a coalition of 100 different organizations, long list of public interest organizations, frankly, from both what you would call the progressive side of the spectrum and the very conservative libertarian side of the spectrum, which is one of those interesting alliances in American politics that doesn't happen that much. The live stream is going to be encapsulated on the Stop Watching Us site. Speaking for myself, my organization is going to capture it and mirror it on our own website. Do all of you belong to like the ACM West listserv? Is that? Yeah, well there you go. I would say that would be one easy way to convey it, but of course if you guys aren't on that listserv, that's not going to so well. What's the best way to get the footage, to get links to the footage out to all of you?
It's simple DVD. It can be, or it can be uploaded to archive.org. Yeah.
Yeah, I think archive.org is actually is capturing it.
Okay.
Can you repeat the questions into the mic for the archive? Because people asking questions won't be heard.
Well, we could pass around a mic for the questions.
We have an extra one.
Should we do that?
Well, but
Okay.
it's 10
All right,
minutes, so
all right. Let me take over like a proper moderator. And we'll do that. Okay. So, archive.org is going to pick it up. You know that?
That's my understanding, is that archive.org is going to capture it and have it available. At least that's their intention.
Could you put a link on the ACM West?
I can do
website?
that. Yep. Yeah.
So all these questions pertain to how do members here get the footage of the Stop Watching Us rally in DC tomorrow.
Okay, so we're talking a little bit about the logistics and the live stream on that. Are there any other? Okay, well, let's.
It's just,
Why don't you come up and ask your question into the mic, so we'll have all this moving here.
well, I don't know if it's a question or what.
Comments are.
Comments.
Comment. There you go. Well, I just want to know a little bit more of what you guys know. I mean, I just get on the internet most of the time and get the information that you gave me and stuff like that. So you're John?
David.
David. Okay, sorry, David.
You need to talk a little
And
bit.
my name is Manu. I got a scholarship to attend this conference, so, but I'm interested about our privacy. And, but I heard that Google, these guys that are at the very top, actually work for the CIA. I just heard that, and I told that there. And that Facebook itself ended up with funding from the FBI. And they make up like, I heard something like, I'll make up a profile and then go out and get information about you or someone else, that kind of thing. I think you know where I'm going with this. And the encryption, Velada, I think that's the name of it, is for journalists that want to protect their source. And supposedly that's an encryption program, so that way, if I'm on the net, nobody really knows who I am. It just randomizes all the IP addresses so it doesn't come back to me. But then, I think about a month ago, I heard that the program itself is actually is part of the people that want to create the surveillance. So,
Okay, so I guess there's kind of two questions there, and the first one is, are the software companies kind of in it with the NSA, which I think is a good question. There's some evidence on both sides there.
Yeah.
And then the second question is, you know, does cryptography work at all? Is there any hope, or is this just a scam and we can't do anything at all? So.
Yeah, so in terms of, I think I'm covered with this one. And I always talk loud anyway. But in terms of whether or not the private companies are sort of in cahoots with the intelligence community, I don't know that to be true. And all I know is that they have denied it, and they have done many things that are inconsistent with that being true. But I don't know. Google particularly has actually been very good at challenging a lot of these court orders. Twitter's been really great at challenging these court orders, and Twitter has not appeared on any of the Prism lists. Again, Yahoo has been to court many times. Has now just gone back to court to try and get a lot of the papers they filed in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court's appeal court. It has a secret appeal court also. It's just gone and was able to get authorization to actually be able to publish a lot of its papers it's filed. And we actually just made those papers available on our website. So there's a lot of, we're discovering now, and we weren't allowed to before, they were able to tell us that a lot of these big companies have actually been fighting these surveillance systems in the legal process. Does that mean that they're not also? I don't know. I don't know. So I just know that there's lots of things. I can't say they're all being horrible actors. I mean, it seems like they're spending a lot of money and doing this stuff and using the legal the processes that were. Part of the problem is that when you get one of these orders and you're not allowed to tell anybody about it, they're secret. And so even if you're fighting, nobody knows that. And then what they saw was their names come up on the list and says, look, we have them. They're cooperating, and people got mad and said, listen, we've been fighting these things for a long time. So I don't know. And then what was the second?
The second question is
Oh, does be
cryptography.
encryption, yeah.
Can we do things to protect ourselves, or are we kind of?
You know, you do the best you can, right? I mean, I think that, and again, there's people at my office who are cryptographers and who work on this issue, and I only know what they tell me. And they tell me that, you know, some encryption is better than no encryption, and strong encryption is better than weak encryption, and that it's always worth encrypting. And now, we all, you know, it's what you said, we did, one of the recent revelations was that the NSA had sort of figured out the Tor network, which was a way of hiding IP addresses, where there was this whole relay system, and it seems like the NSA might have figured that out. You know, so, you know, it is a question of just doing the best you can. So.
Okay, so we have another question.
More of a comment on the encryption.
Yeah, just either yell or come up.
I will yell.
Okay.
Basically, when it comes to cryptography, it's not about, the cryptology goes into, it's either how long they can keep it secret, it's more about time. There's always going to be a code that, all codes are going to be cracked. That's the issue. The question is how long it's going to take for them to crack it. And because cryptology is no longer just a small aspect of governmental society, I mean, it had very, like wind talkers, right? They had a very small group. Now there's classes on it. There is colleges based on it. You know what I mean? So cryptology it's now become a language more so than a secret technology thing that you're trying to break into. It's now its own language. So it goes, and so when you look at cryptology as a language, more than just numbers that spin around and usually they show in movies, you understand that it's about how long are they going to be able to get it.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that it's good practice to use to encrypt your internet communications for other reasons that have nothing to do with government surveillance. I mean, there's lots of corporate espionage as well, lots of data gathering that's being conducted by private entities for business reasons, by foreign governments. I think most people in the U.S. intelligence community will tell you that there are foreign governments who spy on all U.S. internet traffic. They're less sophisticated at beating encryption systems, so that you are providing yourself some security there. But certainly, even if you just don't like, you know, targeted advertising, or you don't want. I mean, encryption can help you that way. And really, encrypting your email is really actually quite easy. I mean, the PGP encryption, which is widely available, and there's even some free open source versions, are very easy to install, you know, and that's actually a very, very robust form of encryption.
Can you apply that encryption to the whole network of a media center, say?
I think you can, and I have no idea how to do that. just because I'm just the lawyer.
Yeah.
So there are technology. I mean, you know, for example, our system at EFF, we go out of our way to try and secure our entire system, and we have an interactive system as well. We don't not certainly not as much as on YouTube, but so it is a possible thing to do that. That's a really great occasion to hire a technologist to do so.
Let me add a couple of things. One is, I mean, if you think about it, the worst possible thing for the internet is for people to stop thinking of it as an instrument of free expression and to start thinking of it as a giant spy system. If in fact it really gets through people's heads that in fact the internet is nothing but a gigantic spy system for the military, this entire valley that we're in will collapse. Well, it will.
Yeah.
Because people don't generally voluntarily wish to become the subject of the military, you know.
Well, I see your point,
So,
but then at the same time, I think it's okay to disagree, right?
yeah, I just wanted to finish the point
Oh.
that I was making. Yeah, it's fine.
Well, what you just said is that, I just keep thinking that there are people that would like to control the masses. So, you know,
Of course there are. And-
so that's where I'm coming from.
But whenever you look at the history of surveillance, you look at the history of social control, just to stay sort of, you know, because we should come back to the subject of the panel, it works when those who are being controlled largely don't understand that they're being controlled.
Right. And I
So there needs to be a myth of freedom that goes with it. If there isn't, then it doesn't work so well.
Well, really, I really what I'm seeing as us who run media centers, this and that, this is more about us understanding what surveillance is and what communication is, and basically informing our members. Because, like I said, like in all aspects from here to wherever everything else, corporations are considered persons. Well, guess what? The United States government is a corporation. You know what I mean? So and they make their speech by money. So really what it goes down to is that they have a lot of money, that's their speech. If we gather the masses and give them knowledge, understanding, then those are our dollars, I guess you would say, as a voice of saying, does it mean that they'll ever stop surveillance? No. It just means that there's be more people who are more in the knowing about surveillance, and if they need to hide something or encrypt it, then that's up to them.
Yeah, and I should say, I also want to say, and again, maybe to sort of shine a little, be a little bit more sunny than I was in my, and to try and sort of tie into also tie into what Alan said, as well as that the internet is still, even despite this, is still a tremendously powerful democratizing force. Despite all of these things that are it's still tremendously powerful democratizing force, and we should continue to use it and promote it in that way in everything we're doing. And the NSA, I say the NSA is collecting all this stuff. But they still are using it primarily for the purposes of trying to fight international terrorism. So again, if you're, I think the collection is bad. I think it's illegal. We filed a lawsuit against it. I hope it stops happening. But in terms of sort of living your day-to-day life, I would actually encourage people not to look beyond it. The abuses that have been identified with this material tend to be things like people with security clearance, like trying to find out what their ex-boyfriends and girlfriends are doing and things like that. We haven't really seen the information being used to sort of undermine democratic institutions.
There's one example. There is an NSA stalker with the ex-girlfriend.
There's more than one. But I mean, those are the types of abuses, and they're horrible. What we haven't seen is them saying, we haven't seen the equivalent of COINTELPRO. Right. Now it might be out there. We just haven't seen that. And so now the other abuse, I think, that certainly has nothing to do with foreign intelligence, is that apparently the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, is very covetous of all this information, and so they were trying to get it for a while. But so anyway, it's not like we should stop using the internet. That's
Okay,
fine.
so I see some hands.
agree.
Okay, so we're going to go to people that haven't spoken before. So let's start here.
Do you have any information about the indexing of this amazing, massive information they have? Are they actually indexing it in a situation that would give us, concern? Or are we talking about this massive data that's sort of like when we're archiving all of our programs at this point? The issue is, how are you going to sift through and find what you're looking for at this point? Do they actually index all of this stuff by our social security numbers?
Yeah, I think, well, we don't, I don't know the answer, but as far as we can tell, they collect this information, and then no human eye sees it unless there is a reasonable articulate suspicion of a link to terrorism, and it's not processed or collated or indexed in any way until there is an authorized search that's authorized by a court order and based on a reasonable articulate. So that's what they say happens, and as far as we can tell, there's no evidence that it's going beyond that, and that's all I know. And I tend to believe that, at least most of it, just because it would be a lot of work for them to do it other way. I mean, this is already, they're already trying to now manage a tremendous amount of information, and had to build this whole huge facility in Utah to handle it. So I'd be surprised if, at least the NSA, and the NSA is really just concerned about military intelligence, and they're very possessive of this information. And
One follow-up question, is there a site we can access your briefs and initial pleadings on the lawsuits that's pending right now?
Yeah, well, so EFF.org, we have everything up on.
EFF.org?
EFF.org, we have everything up on our site, everything
Stands
we've
for
got.
Electronic Frontier Foundation, and it's
Dot org.
EFF.org.
Electronic Foundation,
Electronic
Electronic
Frontier.
Frontier Foundation,
thank you.
EFF.org. And we'll occasionally feature a couple of highlights on our website. But it's really good stuff.
And there's a lot of sites out there doing a nice job collecting information. So Lawfare, F-A-R-E, is a website devoted to the legal issues regarding national security. And they've been doing a really nice job of collecting and organizing information. The ACLU has a great sort of index on its website, on the ACLU's national website. So fortunately, there's a lot of good resources out there.
All of which are indexed, no doubt.
Yeah, okay, so we have a couple of hands, I think, here and here and here. Have I got everybody?
And we're losing our other panelists.
Yes, we are. So let's observe that. And then thank you, Professor. Okay, so there's a couple of things to say, but let's start over here and then we'll work our way over there.
You want to repeat it?
Either yell or come up and grab the mic, whichever you prefer.
So I just saw a film at the United Nations Association Film Festival. I think it was called Terms and Conditions May Apply, and it was really frightening. It was it was more focused on how we give away our privacy rights by having to agree to all these, to use Google, to use Facebook. We just say, yes, I agree, then there's this
We don't know what we're agreeing
agree
to.
to, right. So how do we protect ourselves? Are things being done to change that so that these contracts that we're signing are more understandable and protect our privacy rights?
Yeah, and again, I should think my caveat for answering this question would be that there are people I work with who do a lot of work on this issue and would give you a much better answer than I will. And we do have actually resources on our website about sort of information for consumers as well. But generally, you just need to be a smart shopper as a consumer, and that you need to be aware of what the terms of services say, and understand that there are alternative services out there. So, I mean, there's a lot of, and I know, but so now there are efforts to legislate some of this, and require,
There's some FTC.
and require certain things. But essentially, if you're going to sign up for a free service like Gmail, you're giving away something.
That's the cost.
And so you either have to look away from free services. The more you're going to pay for the service, the more ability you're going to have to negotiate terms, and probably the better you're going to like the terms. And also look for alternative services. So I mean, there are secure anonymous email services out there. Again, anonymous from everybody, but perhaps the federal government. But again, I'm not saying that's not an insignificant protection. And sort of be a smart consumer. I mean, now Google is very good in terms of securing its network from outside attacks. So people who use Google, Google does a really excellent job of having external security. But it's a free service, and the way it makes money is by targeting advertising for you. So it essentially, again, it's not a human being, but it algorithmically scans every email and to identify what products, what advertisers you think. And this isn't, that's what its business model is, so that's not a surprise. I mean, if that's what it says it does. What it also does is that if you're signed into a Google account, and you're emailing at the same time. It's also collecting all that information, so visiting. And again, it's not a human being sitting there. It's all happening algorithmically, so there's not any person who knows all this information. But it's doing that stuff. So if you're using Gmail and you're using Chrome, I mean, it's creating, and other Google and YouTube, it's creating a lot. Again, some computer has a whole dossier of you for the sole purpose of figuring out what advertisements you want to see. Again, that might not bother you. You might not care. You might say, I don't care. I don't never look at the advertisements, or I even like having targeted advertisements. And to me, it's worth it to have a free service. That's fine. If you don't like it, if you like Gmail, you can say, okay, I'll just sign out of it. I'll make sure that I sign out of my program. When I won't search the web, with them if I'm signed in, so that they can as easily make that link. And then if you don't like that, you don't use it, right? You find a different service. So, and that's
Maybe, yeah, and the question becomes, 10 years from now, will there be those other services?
Yeah.
Will you have such a tracked kind of internet
Yeah.
that essentially there's, those alternative choices aren't there? And
Yeah.
that's where you come up against the democratizing power of the internet vis-a-vis what's the attempts to sort of funnel it all down corporate paths, so there's no more choices and there's no more democratizing.
Yeah, and you have to remember also that free email was originally email, there was no free email at all. I mean, the first, we look at I don't know how many remember, but, we look at the well, which was local, and that was a paid, and I guess I still see people have well.com addresses, so I don't think it still functions as a corporation, but the address still work. We have the well and Earthlink, and Mindspring,
Yeah.
so all these original services that were, and AOL, of course, right? And AOL and Prodigy and CompuServe. Remember CompuServe had an email address, and you had like this string of characters that was like 35 characters long, and that was your email address. And so those are the original ones, and those are all paid services. And it really wasn't, the idea of offering free email and then having that work into a business model that was going to be an advertising-based business, it's a fairly recent thing. Even the original free emails were just sort of like fun projects. Like, ooh, let's have a free email service and sign up. I had one that was called blahblah.com. And of course, it closed after 6 months or something because it had no business model. First day, it was just giving away a service. So I think you have to realize when you do free email that it has to be. It's not like someone's doing you a favor by doing a free email. And what you're probably giving up is a modicum of your privacy. And so again, that might not bother you. It does bother me. I don't personally. I don't like. I think it's creepy. And it sort of bothers me, and so I have a Gmail account, but I never actually sign into Gmail. I have it forwards to other places. So I try to not actually sign into my Gmail. But just because I find the advertising stuff a little crass, not because not because I think the government's a problem.
Okay, Autumn, I think you had your hand up for.
Yeah, so for those of us who run media centers, we're really used to articulating, our issues around access and community development and all of that. And these days we're being expected to articulate a lot, broader range of issues, including net neutrality.
Yeah.
And honestly, for a lot of people in our community, that stuff is it just goes over their heads. They don't care. They don't want to think about it. But there's a growing number who are concerned about these issues. So my question is, as media centers, if we were to educate people, say, okay, we want to provide education on this point and this point, what are a couple of tidbits we can carry forward to really, and beyond directing them to EFF's website and stuff like that?
Yeah.
What are some high points we could really hit to begin educating on that?
So the question. Do I need to repeat the question? Did you pick that up back there? Okay.
I'm loud.
Me too. So I can't just send you to our website. There's lots of good resources out there. I think it really just depends on what the specific issue you want to educate people about is, and you probably have some recommendations
Well,
as well.
I have an idea, because I work, some with access centers,
I was
we
gonna
have
say,
these,
yeah.
we have these conversations, but, I think it sort of came out in this panel. There's a liberatory power in the internet, and then there's a number of forces that basically will restrict that. And one of the ways that we look at that is when we talk about network neutrality, and we talk about whether everything that's on the internet is going to have equal standing, or whether we're going to have fast lanes and slow lanes, which is essentially what the corporate model is, because then you can charge people to go drive down the fast lane. And that's your monetization of the internet.
Right.
That's the corporate model. And the question is everything that is freedom enhancing about the internet going to end up on the slow lane? So that's sort of, it's kind of a vital scenario, and the question of whether sort of Verizon's right to charge people to get on a hypothetical fast lane is the preeminent right that we're concerned with, because there's another much bigger right that just isn't, it seems, on the table, and kind of has to be. And when we talk about the privacy surveillance stuff, for me, when I look at the people that come into access centers, they usually come in because they have something to say. And there's something to say that isn't being heard through other channels. That's what's driving them to come in. And, those messages may or may not be political. It depends. But in any case, they're not finding other avenues and other channels. So I think that you have to look at, if voices and perspectives are basically being censored, if they're basically not finding other outlets, often there's a reason for that. They're representing communities who, for whatever set of reasons, really people don't want, powers that be don't want to get heard. By providing a counter, by providing access, by providing an opening for that, in a lot of cases, you're presenting material that wouldn't be heard of otherwise. And my personal feeling is that when you talk about privacy and you talk about surveillance, you really are, in many cases, highlighting some of the issues and some of the communities that are most subject to that kind of surveillance. Because what it comes down to is no matter what they're telling us about, in foreign residents vis-a-vis American residents, when the government picks up data, and we see this from COINTELPRO, and we see this from the church committee, that data is available for the targeting of whatever people don't want to get heard. And somehow or the other down the line, that's how the information gets used. This is the part where I put on my tin hat, so some of you may find this extreme. I don't know. I hope not. But my sense of it is whenever you're talking about surveillance, there's a reason why DEA wants that data. And it doesn't have to do with terrorism. It really doesn't. It has to do with our internal kinds of social control. So I think that it's really important to see that in every way, when you're servicing communities and getting out messages that don't have other audiences, you are really on the front lines of what social control and surveillance means. So the more that you can understand that, and the more that you can convey to people that under this sort of a system, if the NSA does everything that it wants, we're all a terrorist. You're a terrorist, I'm a terrorist. This definition can be used on anyone, at any time, for any reason. This is what we're opening the door to. So at this point, when, as David says, it's not all the way there, we have to start saying, look, there's a path here, and you can read the novels. 1984 was written. We know where the path goes. But at this point in time, because of who we are and what we stand for, we know that's not the path to go down. And everyone that walks into the center and uses this center should have our shared commitment that access doesn't mean surveillance. And access doesn't mean that a corporate tracked net, which are the two things that we highlighted in this panel, which I think are two of the most important issues that we really face with technology. So, sorry, that was the moderator's speech.
And were you looking for?
Don't be quiet.
No, but were you looking for? Were you looking for, in addition to that, for references to like for content where might you be able to find content,
Yeah.
or if you wanted to provide content to your audience on this, or was it more for how in terms of functioning as an access center, how you?
Yeah, I'm looking for, I mean, I'm familiar with EFF's work and your website and stuff, but I'm just kind of wondering, I think you answered it. I think it's like net neutrality and the surveillance are kind of the issues that I've heard come up time and time again today. So if there are a couple of things to educate our users about,
Yeah.
it would be those.
If you have to pick, I think
That's
that's
kind of what I
most
was getting
central
at.
and most compatible with what an access center should be and could be.
Right.
That's
Right,
right.
because it's not my primary function to educate.
Right.
Spend all my time educating
Sure.
about these issues, but I do see it as a function of a media center increasingly to do some education on
Yeah.
them. So that's what I was getting at, is sort of what high points should I be hitting for folks. So thanks.
Okay. Did you have your hand up?
I did have one thing about the Verizon suit. So previously, weren't they arguing that as an ISP, they weren't responsible for all the content that went through, and that's how they were avoiding copyright liability? Since we do not exercise editorial control, we're not responsible for copyright liability.
Well, it's a, I'm getting feedback here. It's a, again, I wish Alan were here I know a little bit, I know some about the net neutrality suit, but I think that's a different legal issue. So, whether there, the essentials of the net neutrality case are whether the carriers' First Amendment rights, sort of curatorial, editorial First Amendment rights, permit them to control the content of what goes over their wires. Or whether they're going to, as Alan said, treat them as common carriers, where you forfeit that right. I might be being provocative by characterizing it that way, because I do believe that the communications companies actually do have First Amendment rights. Now, whether those are First Amendment rights that prevail over other rights, I think is a different issue. But so that's the essential net neutrality argument. And the idea of net neutrality is that the providers need to function neutrally, that they have forfeited whatever editorial, curatorial right. They should function as common carriers, just the same way the train has, Amtrak has to let everybody ride the train, whether or not they like them or not. They don't reserve the right. I mean, the common carrier are those who do not reserve the right to refuse service to folks. So anyway, the other issue that came separately, there was an issue, and these issues sort of cross paths with the BitTorrent stuff about to what extent that service providers should be responsible for bad things people do on their networks, and that was a legal issue that was for the most part addressed in the 1996 Amendments to the Telecommunications Act, parts of the Communications Decency Act, which basically gave everyone immunity. So, for all of you who have websites and someone uploads, and where people can upload either video or comments or whatever to your website, and they do that, you can't be legally responsible, at least under tort law, for what people upload, and we call that Section 230 immunity, because it was Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And that applies to everything but copyright infringement, and then copyright infringement has this whole separate statutory scheme through the Digital Millennium Copyright Act about what you have to do, if someone thinks that people are using your system to violate copyright. So it was sort of a separate thing. I think what Verizon had said in the BitTorrent situation was, even though we might have some legal protections, they were being told by copyright holders, that there's lots of stuff, and then they were required to issue these takedown notices. And what they said is, we're just not going to. We know this service BitTorrent is used for. It was what a lot of people who we were now required. We were being ordered. We had to tell them to take down stuff.
Yeah.
We're using this service, so we're just going to stop facilitating BitTorrent. And that's what. And so we said, because a lot of people now BitTorrent has many legal uses, and so the person realized someone who's using it for legal use complaint, and that's how that whole, I don't know if I've answered your question or not. But I think it was,
It seems to be a strange intersection. On the one hand, they're saying, well, we're not responsible for what people post because everyone can post whatever they want. Because we're not exercising any editorial discretion, we're just providing a service. And then they're turning around and saying, no, we have the right to say we like this and
well,
don't.
they have the immunity whether they are, with the way the law was, or the way that Section 230 was written, and even the way the copyright protections are written, is that even if they are the fact that they might be actively editing, they still have the immunity. So they're probably, from a legal standpoint, better off saying we do edit, we want to edit, because that won't hurt them any other way. So, and as far as I know, that's what they've been saying. I mean, they can be responsible for their own content, but merely because they edit other people's content or select other people's content, they actually can't be responsible.
And Verizon went pretty far. They basically are questioning the ability of the Federal Communications Commission to tell them to do anything at all.
There's lots of
Basically.
issues. I stay away from net neutrality arguing it as a legal issue, because it's too hard.
So we have arrived at 12:15. We started a bit late, so if anyone has a burning last comment or question, I think we can accommodate it. But other than that, thank you very much for attending. Thank you. It's great to talk to all of you.
If I'm using Facebook and somebody mentions my name, I'm notified immediately.
If you request it, you'd be notified.
Yeah, sure. I think it's obvious that the NSA has access to this technology.
Well, there was one of those revelations that came out that the NSA was actually using social networks, doing all this mapping based on social network use.
But it's not just the social networks. It's like in emails if you're using people's names.
Yeah, I mean, anything, because...
It goes directly, instantly, to whoever wants to collect information about that name or how it's being used.
Yeah,
and also in the context and being able to analyze that context.
Yeah, the stuff that came out that there was a lot of talk about was that essentially what the government was doing some type of sort of mapping the way that advertisers are using the same networks.
Right, and so
I actually wasn't surprised about that stuff.
And so if there are political movements, especially in a political season, and if those are growing, they have instant access to who's organizing.
Yeah, you don't want to use Facebook and social, and you don't want to use that for organizing.
So how are you supposed to use pamphlets? We have to go back to paper now to use political organizing?
There's a thing on our website where we sort of review and sort of give gold stars to groups that seem to do a better job, that have better policies for these things.
A lot of this is obvious to me. I mean, this is technology that's been around for quite some time.
Yeah.
So for the NSA, it's nothing new.
Yeah, I mean, the networks that are designed, that the purpose of them is to share information and to make your stuff, those aren't good for, it's very hard to build. I mean, people give Facebook a really hard time, but the purpose of Facebook is to actually do the opposite of what we sort of, if you're talking about privacy, that you don't want to use a service like Facebook, which was completely designed for the people who didn't care about their privacy. It's very hard to build. So then all these privacy things you can turn on and turn off and everything, but essentially, if you really want to have a private communication, don't use Facebook Instant Messenger. I mean, just don't use it. That's not what it was designed to do. You might
nor Gmail, nor anything else on the internet. Well, the internet is no longer secure. It has not been secure for a long time.
There's a difference between being secure from government surveillance and then just being really easily accessible or being unintentionally.
And encryption, I mean, I use Reddit a lot, and a lot of this information is kind of a joke to a lot of people who are very interested in this issue.
Yeah.
And encryption, there is no encryption.
I think it depends who you're hiding from. So you make your decisions based on who you're hiding from. There's some people you can't hide from.
But if it's a business-run government, it's up to business to decide who we're going to run from.
Well, there's different branches of our government also, and they don't like each other. They don't get, and one of the best things we have going for us is that they don't get along, and they're very possessive over their stuff. So,
and so when you get
no indication except for that one DEA thing, that the government's actually sharing this information broadly within the sort of government, and that's really only because they all hate each other.
If they're using the technology to target you for ads, then they're clearly trying to predict what you're interested in.
Well, of course they can do that, yeah.
And so in regards to political movements, they're using predictive technology
Of course.
to figure out your
I
behavior.
would-
And this is
you would
instant.
Completely expect them to be doing that, right? I
Are we
mean,
still?
they would seem to be, if they're intelligence gathering agencies, they would be,
Yeah.
I see a light. They'd be silly to not use predict, I mean, if they wouldn't be gathering intelligence if they weren't using predictive technologies. Again, I don't think that's right, I just,
Okay. Thank you.
Thank